My name is Owen Symes, and welcome to The Copagandists, a podcast about cop shows and the people who make them. In our final foray into the new breed, we'll be discussing the kinds of ideas found within the program. This is a broad topic, for we could talk about the show's depiction of gender, race, its use of voiceover narration to convey a sense of order and clarity, any number of topics. As one of my primary research interests is the relationship between Hollywood and the police, I'll keep my ideological considerations largely within those terms. Ergo, I wish to answer the following questions. How did the police work with the new breed? What did the show try to say about the police and their role in society? How did this version of authentic on-screen cops square with the real thing? Before delving into the details, I'd like to give special thanks to TV historian Jonathan Eder, who personally gave me access to his research for the new breed, an invaluable aid to this project. Eder has written several books on mid-20th century television, including the only complete overview of Quinn Martin's career, Quinn Martin, Producer. Go check it out.
The New Breed, a QM production.
In terms of working with the cops, the new breed received police cooperation from start to finish. We've already seen how series creator Hank Searles visited the LAPD when looking for inspiration after tasked with creating a show for QM. Searles returned from his research sojourn and enthusiastically called up Martin, saying, quote, "They've got a real one down here. It's called the Metropolitan Division." He then penned a number of the program's scripts and does seem to have done additional research with the LAPD while writing for the show. For one episode, the 31st, My Brother's Keeper, he teamed up with the LAPD Juvenile Division. Reporting at the time gives no indication as to what inspired Searles, what he drew from police files or feedback, but the episode ultimately revolved around a completely evil teenager, as one paper put it, who sociopathically fools everyone around him except one person, making his crimes that much harder to detect and thwart. Once development of the program went into full swing, other members of the team sought out police assistance as well. Leslie Nielsen, for one. He was already well disposed towards the police, since his father had been a Canadian Mountie in the Northwest Territories, patrolling via both horse and dog sled. After World War II, the senior Nielsen retired to become a private detective, and imparted a very specific vision of good police work upon his son, telling him, quote, "You can't really be a good policeman unless you have a certain amount of personal feeling in every case. You must have a real reason to drive yourself to do your best." Predisposed to empathize with the police, Leslie Nielsen sought out the LAPD to help sharpen his understanding of his character, Lieutenant Adams. He ultimately spent 2 months studying for the part, attending police academy classes, and going on patrol with officers of the actual Metro Squad. He came away impressed with the police, if not with the public, saying at the time, quote, "One thing I remember above all was that they said so often, 'We are here to protect people, if only they would let us.'" Obtaining police cooperation does not, on its face, mean that the show would be unduly complimentary towards the LAPD in its presentation. But we should recall from our analysis of Dragnet that the LAPD at this time had a keen sense of its own public image and had come to value television as a powerful medium through which it could improve how it was seen by the general public. Moreover, as a rule, institutions don't usually give away something for free. Hand-holding writers, lending equipment, or fast-tracking permits all takes time and effort. We should expect, therefore, that the LAPD would want something in return. On Dragnet, that meant not only a positive portrayal, but also periodically acting as a direct mouthpiece for Chief William Parker. Existing evidence does not indicate that the new breed felt quite the same kind of pressure. Nevertheless, the fact that Parker was still chief when this show went to air in 1961 leads me to believe that they would be under a similar cooperation regime as their predecessor, Dragnet. This context is important for understanding the show that became the new breed. Equally as important is the experience Martin had on The Untouchables, not just for the public outcry against the show's supposed anti-social content, but also because of the ire with which it was received by the nation's top lawman, J. Edgar Hoover. Doubtless, Quinn Martin was at least vaguely aware of the FBI's distaste for his gangster show, something the producer would want to avoid when depicting the LAPD. Little wonder, then, that many of Martin's public statements at the time were extremely positive towards the police. He said in August 1961, for instance, quote, "This series concerns modern crime, the antithesis of what the Untouchables picture. Crime today is more of a hidden thing, more cerebral. Our police are smarter and better educated. They use their brains rather than their brawn." In fact, Martin declared in no uncertain terms what he wanted to accomplish for the police with this show. In October 1961, he said that the new breed actually came out of his desire to improve how TV viewers saw the police officers. Quote, "I wanted to better the policeman's image, and we made up this idea of a commando force. Then I told our writer to find something close to it, and he went down to the Los Angeles Police Department and learned they already have a special unit of well-trained, well-educated men. This he certainly accomplished via a simple but effective episodic formula that we saw in action while synopsizing a few episodes in our last installment. Chaos is introduced into society, usually but not always via some criminal element, and then order is dutifully, doggedly, successfully restored by the public servants working at the Metro Squad. Across its 30-plus episodes, we see the members of the new breed solving murders and burglaries, making house calls and searching for lost children, engaging in social services and grappling with the scourge of substance abuse. They handle deaths of all kinds, murders, suicides, accidents. They solve the mysterious loss of property as well as life. In some, they are an active, even integral part of the social fabric, the community, the polis. To see our tax dollars put to such effective use is certainly inspiring, although it does beg the question, if this is what Chief Parker's LAPD wanted people to think it did, what were its officers really doing? Plenty of reporting on the show at the time gave brief mention of the real Metro Squad that inspired QM. As one paper put it, quote, "The new breed refers to the Metropolitan Squad of the Los Angeles Police Department, a select unit of 75 men, most of them college graduates. The squad, one of the most carefully chosen and trained police teams in the world, is in fact the new breed of policemen." Some media reporters went a little further and tried to give their readers a super brief summary of the squad's history. One paper reported that Metro began in 1939 when Chief William Parker decided to deal with the department's manpower shortages by focusing on quality rather than quantity. In this version of events, Parker strengthened recruitment standards for the force while also siphoning off the top 5% of officers into an elite unit capable of handling all kinds of major cases, basically a strategic reserve of the best-trained officers at his disposal. Now, the problem with this account is that none of it is true. Not the dates, not the decision-makers, not the reason for the creation of Metro in the first place. I have no idea where this poor reporter got his info, but it's rare that a story is so completely incorrect. In fairness, I should point out that the history of the Metro Squad has not been adequately summarized, to my knowledge, anywhere, certainly not in the 1960s, a period when police studies was in its infancy and books tended to focus on anti-crime campaigns or specific scandals rather than providing any kind of narrative history of a given police institution. Even now, the LAPD's own website gives a pretty threadbare account of this division, skipping right from the unit's founding in the 1930s to its expansion in the mid-1960s, leaving the period of our new breed boys shrouded in mystery. What follows then is a quick and dirty rundown of Metro's basic history, gleaned from the existing newspaper record and several secondary sources. The Metropolitan Division was formed in 1933 under Chief Roy Steckel by the combination of several units into a single force. A lone article noted this change at the time, quote, "Formation of a new police unit to be known as the Metropolitan Division by combining a group of miscellaneous bureaus under one head was announced today." This reorganization combined the Intelligence Squad, also known as the Red Squad because it spent most of its time harassing communists, the Vagrancy Squad, the Reserve Unit, and the Chief's Special Squad into one administrative unit. The original intent was not to create a brand new elite force. Rather, it seems to have been done purely in the name of organizational simplicity. As summarized at the time, quote, "These units will function as in the past, except that they will be under the direct supervision of Captain Horrell." In other words, this was about consolidating supervision and command. The earliest reporting on Metro's activities indicates that its focus was as diffuse as one would expect given the varied elements of its composition. These early press reports tell of investigations into narcotics distribution, firefights with bandits, and the corralling of unlawful protest, i.e., smashing protests thought to be inspired by communist agitators. It was this last task, the policing of public demonstrations, that Metro seems to have engaged in the most in these early years, if judged by the weight given by contemporaneous accounts. Indeed, the first reference to the squad that I've come across in the public record, after the announcement of its formation, dealt with public order and riot control, in this case, the maintenance of public order during Election Day. Polls could apparently be quite boisterous during these Depression years. In 1934, Metro Division shifted some of its activities away from vice and labor unrest and towards the kinds of things we might presume the police would want to tackle, like robbery. Compelled by the example of the so-called war on crime then being waged at the federal level by J. Edgar Hoover and the new FDR administration. In January, 61 new officers swelled the ranks of Metro, their focus to be, quote, "a new drive against banditry." This additional manpower, it should be noted, was achieved largely by replacing police crossing guards with workers from the recently created Civil Works Administration, a New Deal program. Now, Metro had access to some 143 officers who provided the LAPD with, as one paper summarized, quote, "a large group of men which can be sent at a moment's notice to take care of emergencies and who in plain clothes or uniform, as the occasion demands, are utilized for special patrol duty in areas where an unusual amount of crime has occurred and on stakeouts. In the same division are also grouped the Vagrancy, Red, and Theater squads." Now we're starting to see the idea of Metro as an elite, solve-any-problem kind of unit first develop. Regardless of this new focus, over the course of the Great Depression, the Metro Squad continued to engage in plenty of anti-worker and anti-communist activity. And during this same period, the Depression years, liberals in the Senate, led by Wisconsin's La Follette, began vigorous investigations into the violations of workers' rights across the country, done under the auspices of the Senate Subcommittee on Education and Labor. From 1936 through 41, this La Follette Committee pored through the records of private police agencies, employers, and local governments, including the Los Angeles Police Department. One document sent to this subcommittee came from Captain William Hines, commander of the Intelligence Bureau, the Red Squad, within the Metropolitan Division. This 1938 memo to the chief outlined, for the benefit of the LAPD's Bureau of Budget and Efficiency, the duties performed by the Intelligence Bureau. These included, quote, investigations, surveillance, arrest, and prosecution of illegal activities in connection with ultra-radical organizations and individuals, such as anarchists, anarcho-syndicalists, communists, syndicalists, socialists, international workers of the world, and outlaw radical labor groups, and sympathetic organizations and groups directly affiliated, and all forms of seditious and treasonable activities. Wow, that's a lot. Under the aegis of these anti-radical activities, the Metro's Intelligence Bureau did all sorts of things: cooperate with immigration officials in order to facilitate deportations, keep up cordial relations with foreign governments, collect information on past and projected radical activities, provide the chief with intelligence reports, work with the Department of Justice and military against radicals, read and study, quote, radical literature, magazines, books, pamphlets, and various publications, chart the connections between various radical groups, index individual radicals, surveil radical meetings and demonstrations, influence radical groups. The list goes on. The activities of the Red Squad were summarized in haphazard fashion by LA officials in response to Senate inquiry. According to this summary, between 1923 and 33, the squad disrupted or prevented dozens of radical meetings. The city attorney lists some of these notable examples, but one wonders about what he leaves off the official record. Their treatment of a vice presidential candidate in 1932 is, I think, illustrative. Quote, September 20th, 1932, Vernon and Central Avenue, Hall, Los Angeles. Vice presidential candidate of the Communist Party was scheduled to speak, but the Red Squad terrorized the owner of the hall and also threw a cordon across the entrance to keep people out. The candidate was grabbed by the police at his hotel, and others were beaten up in the vicinity of the hall. Several were arrested and thrown into jail. LA officials also admitted that between mid-1937 and mid-1938, the Red Squad surveilled 180 strikes and labor disputes. These activities made plenty of enemies, but it wasn't until the Earl Kynett scandal of 1938 that something of the extent of the abuses of both the Intelligence Division and the Vice Squad within Metro were brought to public attention. Officer Kynett began working for the LAPD in the 1920s. Early in his career, he was caught shaking down a prostitute and arrested by his sergeant. The chief, however, hushed up the charges. He was later fired for taking a bribe before being almost immediately rehired and assigned detective work. He bounced around departments for the next few years before landing in the Vice Squad within the Metro Division. During the 1930s, he was a close ally of Chief Davis and thus enjoyed considerable freedom of action. In 1936, after another promotion, he began working in the Intelligence Division. His attempted bombing of a local reformer in 1937 ultimately landed him and the Red Squad in water too hot even for Chief Davis to handle, and by 1938, Kynett was in prison, although paroled in 1945. Davis was out as chief, and the Intelligence Division was dissolved. But the Metro Division overall soldiered on, taking on more responsibility after World War II with the addition of a traffic enforcement unit. Yet even with the Intelligence Bureau officially dissolved, the division still continued to monitor the organizing of workers. As noted in the LAPD's 2015 Labor Relations Manual, in an introduction talking about the history of labor relations within the department, quote, prior to 1949, thousands of department hours were expended on uniformed personnel policing strike scenes. Unfortunately, during the course of these events, union officials alleged that the presence of uniformed officers was provocative, and at times, their actions resulted in civil litigation against the city. As a result of these risk management issues, a review of the techniques used by the police was necessary to more effectively maintain order at labor disputes. In 1949, a labor relations unit was thus specifically added to Metro, and labor relations officially entered the lexicon of the LAPD. Metro, according to the LAPD's own version of this history, endeavored to improve its relations with labor leaders, hoping to gain their cooperation so that, quote, maintaining of law and order during labor disputes could be accomplished. Quote, as a result of these meetings, the union's leaders agreed to exert more control over their members at strike scenes. The department, in return, was able to reduce the number of uniformed personnel deployed at the scene of a strike, maintain law and order, and not become the focal point of the dispute. How nice for them. Despite all its responsibilities, the division actually lost personnel after the war. By the mid-1950s, under Chief Parker, the division's manpower stood at roughly 70 officers, about half of what it had been 20 years earlier. Partly, this was a result of continued manpower shortages brought on by the Korean War. Partly, it was the result of Chief Parker's policies, which raised the recruitment standards for the LAPD and instilled harsh military-style discipline among its ranks. Parker preferred to keep his own intelligence-gathering efforts closer to his chest, and so created a new intelligence division made up of around 20 officers, which he could then monitor directly and to use for his own political ends. This new unit worked with the Public Information Division to surveil the city's most politically problematic denizens and keep Parker abreast of any developments that he might consider deleterious to his own policies or aspirations. So that's the history of Metro up through 1960 or so. Given this history, it's fair to say a few things about the depiction of the Metro division on the new breed. First, the lack of labor strife on the show is a legitimate blind spot with regards to accuracy and completeness. Even without the notorious Red Squad, Metro did engage in labor relations even in the 1960s. This is not a blind spot that is unique to one particular show, of course. Cop shows very rarely depict this kind of policing for reasons that can be traced back both to politics but also to practical storytelling considerations. Second, this gap in the show's authenticity does not necessitate condemning the whole thing as political theater. There were elements to the production that, with some poetic license, simplifying of procedures, shortening of timelines, do come across as relatively realistic. Metro did involve itself in the solving of street crime, the handling of vice cases, etc. The universally positive results of these investigations might be Hollywood magic, but the specific procedures or actions depicted on the show aren't necessarily false. Third, and most importantly, is the inescapable conclusion that whatever authenticity was on offer within the new breed, it still suffered from the same limitations as Dragnet and other police procedurals we've looked at thus far. It served a specific propaganda function for the police who cooperated in its production. Whereas Dragnet sought to bolster the general image of the LAPD, the new breed focused on a specific organ within that body. This organ, despite the litany of ailments that plagued its medical history, was presented to viewers of the 1960s with a clean bill of health. It's impossible to measure the effect this show had on people's perceptions at the time, but the boost to Metro's image could not have come at a better time. This was the start of the 1960s, by many accounts a kind of second civil war, which saw the country shaken by anti-war protests, the civil rights movement, white supremacist terrorism, student radicalism, and the varied responses from all levels of government seeking to respond to this ferment. By the middle of the decade, the surveillance and harassment powers of the LAPD would be put under immense pressure as that institution grappled with these political forces. The cops responded energetically, often violently and illegally, but were given considerable breathing room by a public that had been propagandized by more than a decade of TV personalities like Sergeant Friday and Lieutenant Adams, and even Elliot Ness. Officers like Captain Kynette, the guy that tried to bomb the reformer, however you say his name. Officers like him didn't make for good television as measured by police officials, and thus by network executives or TV producers either. Under Chief William Parker, the small but dedicated intelligence division had done the bulk of surveillance work. His successor, Chief Tom Redden, responded to this growing unrest by expanding these capabilities. He upstaffed the Metro Division to 220 and tasked it with once again gathering intel on local radicals. This inaugurated a pattern that would continue for more than a decade. In 1970, the LAPD's intelligence gathering units were again reorganized. The Intelligence Division was split in two, with one division dedicated to organized crime and the other to public disorder. In practice, the creatively named Public Disorder Intelligence Division would turn out to be the successor to the Red Squad of old. By the mid-1970s, it had amassed a staff of nearly 190 and a budget of $6 million, more than Robbery Homicide Division, in fact. It operated until 1983, when backlash to its many abuses frothed into enough public pressure as to once again force the LAPD to close it down. This cycle of surveillance, abuse, public outcry, and mild institutional reform was frustratingly absent from shows like The New Breed. This gap, convenient for the PR needs of the police, is a constant across most TV police procedurals, which focus on murder and robbery, on street crime, leaving the abuses of the police themselves, to say nothing of the machinations of white-collar crime, out of the script almost entirely. So, that's The New Breed, a well-produced cop show that had very little to say about the police or their relationship to society. Very little, that is, that hadn't already been said by its predecessors. It dealt with the same stories, avoided the same pain points, and presumed the same kind of institutional expertise as did Highway Patrol and Dragnet before it. It did not fail because of this lack of story innovation or due to its political conservatism. It failed because Quinn Martin overstepped himself and insulted the pride of an advertising agency. Next time, we'll begin a brief sojourn away from the police procedural to cover Quinn Martin's most impressive and successful show, The Fugitive. As a program whose main character was a fugitive from justice, it should prove an interesting foil to the shows we've covered thus far. How would a police cheerleader like Quinn Martin handle a criminal protagonist? We'll find out together.
Name, Dr. Richard Kimball. The destination, Death Row State Prison. The irony, Richard Kimball is innocent. Proved guilty, what Richard Kimball could not prove was that moments before discovering his murdered wife's body, he saw a one-armed man running from the vicinity of his home. Richard Kimball ponders his fate as he looks at the world for the last time and sees only darkness. But in that darkness, fate moves its huge hand.
Thanks for listening to this week's belated episode. Sources are in the show notes below. You can find an essay version of this script, complete with detailed citations, on my Substack at Owen Symes. You can also find me on Blue Sky, Owen-Symes, YouTube at Integral History, and you can check out my book, He Was Our Man in Washington, A History of the Obama Years. Music by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. See you next time.